Good evening. I'm Mitchell Stevens, a professor in the Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute at New York University. Before we begin, let me warn you that we'll be pushing the current capabilities of Zoom somewhat this evening. There will be glitches. Our hope is that there aren't any disasters. Portions of this program were, as they say, pre-recorded. I should emphasize to begin with that there was a lot of competition for the honors we are announcing this evening. Most awards in journalism focus on just one or two forms of journalism: newspapers, magazines, nonfiction books, documentaries, broadcasts, or now podcasts. All of the above qualified and were nominated for this award, and there is plenty of amazing work on our list of nominations that did not make the top 10. We recommend it as a reading, listening, and viewing list. Most awards in journalism select from the work produced in 1 year. Our honors were also particularly competitive because we had 10 years worth of journalism from which to choose. That extended period of time had the additional advantage of enabling us to consider journalism that has been around for a while. In my view, the best journalism helps people understand what they did not before understand. It helps them contemplate a behavior, person, event, or policy from a new perspective. It enlightens. I believe all 10 works of journalism we will be honoring this evening have demonstrated over time that ability. At New York University, we have long been devoted to recognizing and exposing our students to such extraordinary journalism. 20 years ago, New York University selected the top 100 works of journalism of the 20th century.
We exist at a time when a lot of folks don't trust us. We exist at a time when our ranks have been severely diminished.
10 years ago, we selected the top 10 works of journalism of the first decade of the 21st century.
I'd say the past decade was exciting but troubled. There was groundbreaking work alongside ever-growing crises of legitimacy, of fairness, of relevance for journalism.
To select the best journalism of this past decade, we compiled a list of 122 nominees: articles, series, shows, documentaries, podcasts, websites, films, and books.
One of the things that's great about seeing a list like that is it is sort of inspiring to see the incredible work that's being done in a lot of different fronts, in a lot of different fields.
Together with 14 distinguished outside judges, the faculty of NYU's Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute voted on which 10 works of journalism from this long list we should honor.
We saw such an assembly of high-quality journalism.
A lot of very stylish writers on the literary.
We've seen people from underrepresented groups finally having their stories told.
I'm in awe of what people accomplished.
From these impressive nominees, we have selected the top 10 works of journalism of the second decade of the 21st century. Let's begin. My colleague on the journalism faculty at NYU, David Dent, writes often on politics and partisanship, most recently for the Daily Beast. David Dent will present the number 10 work of journalism of the decade.
Journalism, at its highest place and most significant role, shines the focus on the problems that rupture the ideals of our democracy. This compels us to look for ways to be better as a nation and as a world. In that regard, the staff of the Washington Post achieved such a high standard with its police shootings database, 2005 to the present. The reporting was innovative with real-time data journalism, giving deep substance to the story that has consumed our nation's sense of morality over the racial injustices that live so deeply in American policing.
Thank you, David, and thank you to the Arthur Carter Journalism Institute and its judges. It is a distinct honor for the Washington Post to be recognized in this way. This effort began 6 years ago when Wes Lowery convinced us that the Post should count every fatal police shooting in America in 2015. In that first year, some 70 Post journalists built the database and told the stories it yielded. What have millions of readers learned from the database? That American police officers shoot dead about 1,000 people a year. That number doesn't change. That those killed are overwhelmingly male and that most of them are armed. That an alarming percentage of the dead, roughly a quarter, are people in the throes of mental or emotional crisis. Perhaps most importantly, we have proven with data what many people long suspected. Black Americans are disproportionately represented among those killed by police. From 2015 to 2019, more than 1/3 of the unarmed people shot dead by police were Black. Their deaths followed the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson in 2014, which ignited the outrage that compelled us to begin our count. In 2020, a handful of my colleagues are the week in, week out stalwarts of the database and deserve mention tonight. Researchers Julie Tate and Jennifer Jenkins, Deputy Investigations Editor David Fallis, Graphics Editors Danielle Rindler and John Meiskens, and Graphics Reporter Joe Fox. In journalism, we often celebrate the individual, the relentless reporter, the elegant writer, the intrepid thinker, and rightly so. Indeed, these terms describe some of tonight's honorees. But news organizations as a whole also must take risks and make big investments in order to help society better understand itself and what needs to be remedied. We're grateful to the Institute for honoring this reporting and the organization behind it. Your recognition strengthens our resolve to undertake more work of this scope, complexity, and ambition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cameron. Through his pioneering work online, Jay Rosen has made himself one of the most influential journalism critics in the country. He directs our Studio 20 graduate program. Jay Rosen will present the number 9 work of journalism of the decade.
David Fahrenthold's series of articles demonstrating that Donald Trump's claims to be giving a lot of money to charity were mostly bogus are deserving of recognition in our list for several reasons. One is that they're classic investigative reporting, revealing something that a person in power doesn't want the public to know. They're also quite revealing about Trump's character and his way of operating. Almost everything he does is a scam, and Fahrenthold was able to show that. The thing that excited me most about Fahrenthold's work were his methods. He decided to start doing this kind of reporting in collaboration with readers and followers on social media. And that meant that he not only shared his methods with them, but he asked for their help, and he got their help in several ways that ended up being quite significant for his reporting. I remember the shock and delight I felt when I first saw a screenshot of David Fahrenthold's call list that he shared with his followers on Twitter, which showed everyone he was trying to reach in order to nail down a single fact about Donald Trump's charitable giving. And by using these simple methods of here's what I'm trying to do, here's all the people I have to get in touch with, and asking questions like, has anyone seen anything like this? Does anyone know about a veterans group that might be able to answer this question? Has anyone come across this image? He was able to gather more information than he could get by himself. And I think this open source participatory form of journalism that he helped pioneer was one of the reasons he won the Pulitzer Prize, and it's certainly one of the reasons why we've included him on our list.
first, wow. I can't imagine a greater honor than just to be listed in the company of the journalists I'm in the company of tonight, the other winners. It's a group of brave, innovative, world-changing journalists, and I am amazed to be in their midst. I'm very grateful to NYU and to the judges. This, as everyone knows, has been a year that felt like a decade, and a decade that felt like a millennium. So I don't know how you possibly narrow down all that news to 10 stories, and I'm amazed that my stories were among those honored. Just so you know, this might have gone either way. In full disclosure, in the same decade, I once wrote a long feature whose premise was that Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal could be our next president. So it could have happened just as easily that I ended up on the 10 worst list. And it may still, I don't actually know when that Zoom is. I wanted to say a thank you to my wife, Elizabeth Lewis, to my daughters, Alexandra and Stella, who put up with me through 5 crazy years and counting on the Trump beat. I also wanted to say thank you to my editors, including Marty Barron, Cameron Barr, Stephen Ginsburg, Matea Gold, Sanda Shilmashaker, Peter Walston, for their patience, for their suggestions, for their support. I also, as Jay referenced, I couldn't have done this without my readers, and I wanted to say a special thank you to them. They made this possible, and they responded to my attempts to open up my reporting with their eyeballs, first of all, with their attention, but also with story tips, with subscriptions, with amateur sleuthing. Without them and all the time they put in and their faith in the truth, as I said, I wouldn't be here. I wanted to say one last word about optimism. I don't have to tell you all, this has been a hard 10 years in journalism, but I have 2 great reasons to be optimistic about the future, about what's coming. One is those readers and their continued faith in our work and their continued belief in the ideals that we share. The second reason I'm optimistic is my fellow winners and all those who won honorable mention, this incredible group of people you've honored tonight. They fought to tell the truth, and they succeeded in a decade when truth was under assault all the time from seemingly every angle. As a new decade begins, I am so proud to still be in that fight and to share that fight with all of you. So thank you.
Thank you, David, and congratulations. Sarah Stillman is a staff writer at The New Yorker, and she directs the global migration program in the journalism school of some little university uptown called Columbia. She was one of 14 distinguished outside judges who helped us select these works. Sarah Stillman will present the 8th work of journalism of the decade.
I remember really clearly when the 1619 project dropped. I can actually picture where I was on my parents' porch and the anticipation that had built up around it. And I think so many of us in the field of journalism have come to feel a bit disillusioned about the capacity of deep dive investigative work to really capture the public consciousness and to hold the public's attention for more than the length of a tweet. And then along came the 1619 Project's central creator, Nicole Hannah-Jones, and her remarkable vision to help us fundamentally reimagine the story of our country's founding, rooted less in 1776, the standard moment that we've been taught about in schools, and more in the moment that the first slave ships arrived in the British colony of Virginia. Nicole's central essay for the project is personal and it's tender, and it demands a huge amount of its readers in terms of forcing our recognition of the role that slavery and anti-Black racism has played in shaping who we are, and also helping us to recognize the ways that the contributions of Black Americans have been foundational to our country in the fight to force what democracy can really look like from the very start. And the project is also pretty remarkable in its breadth. We've got contributions from the poets like the likes of Clint Smith, sociologists like Matt Desmond, an incredibly striking photo essay by Danielle Bowman filled with haunting images of the Atlantic slave trade that have stayed with me ever since I first saw that issue of the magazine that so many people actually kept in their homes as a collection item. So it really, really became an event. And that's, I think, the best of what we could ask for from journalism, is to force a conversation, to set the table for a conversation that is, in this case, centuries overdue. So an enormous congratulations to the 1619 Project for creating a journalistic event that I really believe our children's children may very well know about, and that our country will very much be the better for.
Hope everyone can hear me. Apparently, my video is not going to show this evening, which may be a sign of dark times ahead. I don't know. I would certainly like to thank the Journalism Institute for this tremendous honor tonight. I was completely surprised when I found out that the 1619 Project would be included among such an esteemed list. This past year has been one of the most exhilarating of my career, but also one of the most emotionally and professionally challenging. It's hard to state how much this means to receive this honor among so many of the journalists whose work I have long read and respected and admired and cherished, but to receive it on this night, in this week in particular, because I'm sure many of you are aware that it has been a tough week. This was a project that aimed to take a story that has been treated as an asterisk to the American story and force it into the center. We wanted with this project to force the year 1619, the beginning of American slavery, into the national lexicon. And no matter what else, we accomplished that. In a year where the country has been undergoing a racial reckoning, where many Americans are questioning how did we go from electing the first Black president to a president who has sought to sow racial divisions, the 1619 Project in some ways has shown us that we cannot escape our past until we deal with it. This is not journalism that is easily accepted, and it was expected that this would be journalism that would be critiqued and challenged. And I hope that in that challenge and in that discomfort would force us all to think differently about the country we thought we knew, so that we can create a country that lives up to our founding ideals. So on behalf of all of those who worked tirelessly on this project, the dozens, literally dozens of journalists and writers, photographers, artists who put their hearts into this project, I gladly accept this award. And I also want to accept this award on behalf of the 40 million descendants of American slavery. No matter what else is said about this project, I know what this project has meant to you all, and I know what this project has meant to us. So I will forever be grateful, and congratulations to all of the winners tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, and congratulations, Nicole. Perri Klass is a professor of journalism and pediatrics at NYU. She writes columns about children's health for The Times, and her latest book, A Good Time to Be Born: How Science and Public Health Gave Children a Future, was published yesterday. Perri will present the #7 work of journalism of the decade.
It's an honor to introduce Sherry Fink, who we are honoring tonight for the extraordinary reporting that she did about how Hurricane Katrina played out in a hospital in New Orleans. I read this article first as an article in the New York Times Magazine, and it completely stunned me. She expanded it into a remarkable book, 5 Days at Memorial, and she won the Pulitzer Prize in 2010 for this remarkable piece of reporting and investigative journalism.
Hi. I'm so just incredibly honored by the selection and very surprised by it. 5 Days at Memorial is the story of what happened after Hurricane Katrina, when a hospital and all the patients and the staff there were surrounded by water and had to wait days to complete a rescue, and all the power failed. And the story really looked at individual decisions, what to do when first you have to decide who to save first, and you know that you could lose all power. And second, what to do for people who you think you can't save. I think a lot of journalism focuses on the holding power to account and looking at the systems. But in this case, I was trying to look at, what is the role of our individual decisions when the institutions on which we rely from the federal government to local to the very hospital or school or whatnot, isn't perfectly prepared for a crisis that is in fact a predictable one, as the hurricane was in New Orleans and as the current pandemic was, in terms of a common planning scenario for the rare but very foreseeable and potentially catastrophic event. And so, what is our role as individuals in an imperfect world, and the decisions that we make in terms of those periods of time? So the book looked at that, and also did talk about the scenario of a pandemic and how hospitals would cope. So I think a lot about that, and of course we all do these days. And I just wanted to use this moment to shout out to the journalists and students who are out there trying to make sense of a time like this, and the educators. So perhaps we'll get better at telling these stories before they happen, and helping to highlight the importance of investments in these areas of preparedness, because we've seen so many cycles where we learn these lessons and we grasp that there are issues, but that we quickly turn our eye away. So what is it we could do as journalists to try to break that cycle? Thank you very much again, and it's really an honor to be among these top 10 choices.
Congratulations, Sherry. Meryl Gordon directs our graduate program in magazine and digital storytelling. Meryl is the author of a number of biographies, most recently of Bunny Mellon. Her husband, Walter Shapiro, has been for many decades one of the top political reporters in the United States. Walter, one of our outside judges, currently is reporting on the campaign for the New Republic. Together, they will introduce the sixth work on our list of the top 10 journalism of the decade.
Hi, I'm Walter Shapiro.
I'm Meryl Gordon.
And we're going to be presenting this award jointly. In November 2018, an investigative article in the Miami Herald included this key passage. More than a decade later, and I'm quoting, at a time when Olympic gymnasts and Hollywood actresses have become a catalyst for a cultural reckoning about sexual abuse, Jeffrey Epstein's victims have all been but forgotten. These women, now in their 20s and 30s, are still fighting for an elusive justice that even the passage of time has not made right. But these abused women were not forgotten, thanks to the dogged and inspiring reporting of Julie Brown, whom we are honoring tonight. Beginning in 2017, Julie Brown and her photographer, Emily Michaud, investigated the outrageous 2008 secret plea bargain that allowed Epstein to get away with a limited 13-month sentence in a Florida county jail, instead of a prosecution that could have led him to life in prison on federal charges. Brown located 60 of Epstein's victims, 60, and interviewed 8 of them for her initial story. The federal prosecutor who blessed this unusual non-prosecution agreement in 2008 was Alexander Acosta, who went on to serve as Donald Trump's labor secretary. Acosta was rumored to become the next attorney general when Brown's story appeared. Instead, Acosta was eventually forced to resign because of the furor surrounding the Epstein deal.
Investigative reporting is both expensive in terms of time and travel. The Miami Herald, once a great regional newspaper, is suffering the pains of economic contraction. Yet Brown persisted with her reporting, even at times absorbing the travel and other expenses herself rather than filing expense reports. Even after the award-winning series appeared in the Herald, Brown came under pressure from Epstein's friends and defenders. Alan Dershowitz even wrote an open letter to the Pulitzer Board, concluding with these words, quote, "So shame on Brown, shame on the Miami Herald," end quote. Instead of shame, Julie Brown deserves honor. That is why we are so proud that Julie Brown's series on Jeffrey Epstein is one of the 10 award winners for the best works of journalism of the past decade.
going to cry. I'm sorry. I'm very emotional. Thank you very much for recognizing it. It's been, it's very hard. My first internship was working for a small local newspaper in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. I fully expected that I would have to sacrifice a lot in order to stay in journalism. I knew that I would have to waitress part-time, which I did at the start of my career. And I'd have to start at the bottom, writing obituaries and writing about grade school field days. There was never a time in my career that I wasn't worried that I was not going to be employed. I was always worried that I possibly would lose my job. But I tell you all this because all those experiences, every single one of them in local journalism, led me to become a better storyteller, a better journalist, and more importantly, a better human being. The best journalists are those who are not just relentless or gifted with words. They are compassionate and courageous. We all want to win Pulitzer Prizes and to work for, I always wanted to, of course, dreamed of working for the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN. But for me anyway, starting out at the bottom and working at local newspapers and sacrificing comfort and security helped me better understand some of the very people and institutions that I would be called upon to write about later in my career. Looking back, all those experiences gave me the tools and the skills I needed to do what I wanted to do the day that I graduated from college. Journalism is hard. Going up against political machines, corrupt institutions, and powerful people like Alan Dershowitz and Jeffrey Epstein will always be a struggle. But to do something you love nearly every day and to achieve something, even small, that makes a positive difference in someone's life is probably one of the greatest gifts I've ever been given. There has never, at least in my lifetime, been a more urgent need for real journalism or a more important time to play a role in distinguishing truth from lies and to give voice to those who have none. I have to give so much thanks to my editor, Casey Frank, who supported me in this project. And of course, Mindy Gonzalez, who also, supported me, and especially to Emily Michelle, my videographer and photographer. And last but not least, really, the courageous people in this story were the women who trusted me with telling the stories that were just it was the worst time of their life. And I think that the fact that they were able to finally tell their stories was the most courageous part of this whole project. So thank you.
Wow, thank you. Congratulations, Julie. Rachel Swarns is one of the newer members of our faculty. She came to us from the New York Times, for whom she has exposed the fact that both Georgetown University and the Catholic Church had been entangled with slavery. Rachel will present the number 5 work of journalism of the decade.
It is my great pleasure to present this award to Michelle Alexander for her book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration and the Age of Colorblindness. Her book, first published in 2010, has profoundly shaped our understanding of the connections between slavery, institutional racism, and modern-day policing and mass incarceration. Over the past 10 years, her work has had a deep impact on our national discourse, public policy, and the lives of countless African Americans touched by the criminal justice system. It has been lauded by scholars, policymakers, advocacy groups, and community activists, and I'm thrilled that we're recognizing it today as one of the most important works of the decade.
Hi, I'm Michelle Alexander, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you to the judges and the journalism faculty at NYU for selecting The New Jim Crow as one of the top 10 works of journalism of the decade. When I first published the book 10 years ago, nearly everyone told me that the book would never find an audience, and they had good reason for their skepticism. The book was released just 1 year after President Obama was inaugurated as our nation's first Black president, and our country was awash in post-racialism. Few people wanted to hear that a system of racial and social control had been born again in this country, one that functioned in a manner eerily reminiscent of caste systems we supposedly left behind. Yes, we had the highest rate of incarceration in the world, locking up more poor people and people of color than any country in the world, but the politics of white supremacy were considered part of our racial history, not our present. Back then, Trayvon Martin was still alive. The phrase Black Lives Matter had not yet been uttered online, and the people of Ferguson, Missouri had not yet erupted, and videos of police killings had not yet begun to go viral. In many ways, I wrote The New Jim Crow in a different world, a time when the recurring cycles of racial reform, retrenchment, and backlash were more difficult to see, and when racial bigotry and intolerance were more subterranean in our political discourse. Things have changed for better and for worse, but thanks to a new generation of activists, as well as emboldened scholars and determined journalists, America is being forced to reckon with its racial history and its present. We are beginning to see that our collective future depends on us reimagining what justice means and what our democracy can and should be. Journalism, I think, is playing a critical role in that process, and many of the other journalists and authors who are being honored tonight have inspired, challenged, and influenced me greatly. So I want to thank you. Thank you for honoring all of our contributions and for signaling that this type of work that seeks to challenge conventional ways of seeing and interpreting our world, is needed now, perhaps more than ever. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, and thank you, Michelle. Susie Linfield from the journalism faculty at NYU published a book on Zionism and the left, The Lion's Den, last year. Susie Linfield will present the fourth of the top 10 works of journalism of the decade.
The novelist Zadie Smith has written that when assessing a work of fiction, one can look at whether it approaches its characters with containment or compassion. Containment is a kind of imprisonment. By compassion, on the other hand, Smith meant not sympathy or admiration, but rather the ability to allow one's characters to flourish, to expand, to live in all their radically imperfect humanity. Smith's paradigm applies to nonfiction too. Kate Boo's Behind the Beautiful Forevers is, beyond doubt, a model of compassion. Boo takes us in the deepest way imaginable into the Anawati slum and the lives of its residents, who are desperately trying to survive in, succeed in, to just plain understand the new modern India. Their lives are dominated by shocking levels of poverty, corruption, physical brutality, and legal injustice, yet also by astonishing levels of ingenuity, hope, and ethical intelligence. But Boo shows too how very difficult it is for the wretched of the earth to create bonds of solidarity with one another in the Darwinian struggle for survival, in the fiercely competitive neoliberal India that is perhaps too easily lauded by development theorists. Boo's subjects are caught between tradition and modernity, each of which exacts a cruel price. Behind the Beautiful Forevers is a work of journalism, of anthropology, of political analysis, of literature. It is surely a work of shimmering compassion in the truest sense of that word.
Catherine Vu was not able to be with us this evening, but expressed her gratitude. Dan Fagin, who directs our graduate program in science, health, and environmental reporting, won the Pulitzer Prize in General Nonfiction in 2014 for his book, Tom's River. Dan Fagin will present the #3 work of journalism of the decade.
We often assert that journalism can change the world, but that's a lot easier to say than to show. There is no doubt, though, that this highest of standards applies to the superb investigative reporting of Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey of the New York Times in documenting the horrific acts of the studio chief Harvey Weinstein and other sex abusers. Kantor and Twohey later expanded their Times stories into a book called She Said, published last year. Rereading their original Times stories now, 3 years after they were published, what's most striking to me is how sickeningly commonplace the behavior of Weinstein and all the rest of the abusers now seems. We remain shocked, at least I hope we do, but we are no longer surprised. We have learned just how prevalent this terrible abuse of power is, because so many other women, and some men too, have found the courage to speak up, instead of keeping quiet and sometimes even blaming themselves. The courage of Weinstein's victims has given millions of others similar courage, and it could never have happened without the fearless reporting of Kantor and Twohey. That kind of world-changing impact is possible only because their reporting was locked down tight, and I mean tight. It had to be, since the abusers could afford the most ruthless lawyers and private investigators money can buy. In 2018, Kantor and Twohey and a team of Times reporters and editors were honored with the 2018 Pulitzer Prize for Public Service, which they shared with another reporter who did phenomenal work, Ronan Farrow of The New Yorker. And now, it's my honor to recognize Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey as our judges' third-ranking designees among the top 10 works of journalism of the decade. Congratulations to you both.
Thank you so much. Megan and I happened to catch the long list of 100 works a few weeks ago on Twitter, and we were so happy to be included in such incredible company, and it's really the honor of a lifetime to be on this list and in this truly exquisite company. We wanted to just start by telling you the story of what we were doing on March 11th, which is basically, as you may remember, the last normal day in New York before everything shut down. We were at Harvey Weinstein's sentencing. We crowded into criminal court in Lower Manhattan. We were basically the last two people in the room. We only got in because we actually got Weinstein's friends and family seats. Not that many people had showed up to support him, apparently, so they gave us the seats instead. And we stood just a few feet away from Weinstein, and as you may remember, he had already been declared guilty, but he hadn't been sentenced. And he was given a far longer sentence, over 20 years, than anybody anticipated. And it was an astonishing moment because it wasn't that long ago that this man seemed untouchable. When we were beginning our investigation, we had to sit through a lot of condescending lectures about how the casting couch was just part of Hollywood. We would never be able to nail the story. And even if we did, nobody would care. So with that on March 11th, it really felt like the book in some ways slammed closed on Harvey Weinstein, and like the story had a concrete ending in a way that very rarely happens in journalism. But that is part of why we wanted to write our own book, She Said. I mean, really, it's an invitation into this precious partnership that Megan and I have shared for 3+ years. And what we try to do in the book is take you on the journey from the very first hushed phone calls with actresses all the way to the final confrontations we had with Weinstein in the halls of the New York Times.
And, we wrote the book not only to sort of, take all this juicy off the record information and put it between the pages of a book, but because we were trying to drive at a bigger idea, which is, there was always a question, why this story? Why this set of stories? I mean, all of our publications and publishers, put out a huge number of really important, well-reported stories every year. And why did so much change come from this line of reporting? And we just really walked away feeling so strongly that facts are part of what create change. And the book, I think, tries to capture what we all try to do, which is take information, get at the truth, report it accurately and fairly, and then hope that it can be the basis for some sort of productive social discussion. We also want to say that, during the pandemic, She Said has taken on kind of a new resonance for Megan and I, because this is such a lonely time and we're all apart. I don't know anybody who isn't lonely right now. And the chance to be together in these pages during this time is so, so precious. So I'm going to hand it over to Megan, who's a few blocks away.
Yeah, in our reporting and in this book, we did more than expose Weinstein. We also pulled the curtain back on the New York Times, on the many other people who were part of the journalism and also those who protected it. In these pages, readers will meet Arthur Sulzberger and later his son, A.G., who were unwavering in their support of our investigation, making clear to Weinstein that his attempts at interference would never work with the publisher of the New York Times. Dean Baquet, who an hour before we published our story, met Weinstein's near hysterics on speakerphone with complete calm, finally cutting Weinstein off and walking out the door with the lines, some of my favorites. We want to give you every word that you want to say, so say it. I've got a newspaper to put out. And Rebecca Corbett, the third woman to break the Weinstein story, her commitment to this investigation, to this profession, was on full display in that scene of her at her desk on deadline, working through the night, taking only a 45-minute nap to make sure that every word in our story was just right. Telling the behind-the-scenes story of the Weinstein investigation never would have happened without Elise Cheney, our literary agent, and Anne Godoff, our editor at Penguin Press, who was truly a galvanizing force. I mean, at every turn, Anne pushed us to write a book that would be read for years to come and that would serve as a lasting record of this kind of that particular remarkable period of time and the role that journalism played. This honor tonight inspires a lovely thought, that perhaps we did. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jody and Megan, as well as Megan's parents who are with us on Zoom this evening, I'm told. I'm sitting here listening to these incredible talks by these incredible journalists, and I'm thinking, wow, journalism students would be lucky to listen to all this stuff. And then I'm thinking, oh, wait a second, I'm lucky to be able to listen to all this stuff. It's just so inspiring. You may have noticed that the last 6 works we have honored were credited to women, and there's one more to come. I just want to note that we are thrilled by that fact. And I hope you will notice by the time we are done that half of these top 10 works of journalism of the decade are focused on matters of racial justice. We thought it was important, therefore, to ask one of our distinguished outside judges to participate in this event. For in 1994, Leon Dash published a book on racial justice based on Pulitzer Prize-winning reporting he did for the Washington Post. It was called Rosalie, A Mother and Her Family in Urban America. It is a progenitor of some of the journalism we are celebrating today. Leon Dash's work made our list of the top 100 works of journalism of the 20th century. He is now at the University of Illinois. Leon Dash will present the number 2 work of journalism of this decade.
Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns is an extraordinary work in terms of capturing the Great Migration out of the South, beginning in the post-World War II period and ending up with 3 families, one that comes out of Monroe, Louisiana to Los Angeles, the second out of Mississippi to Chicago, the third from Florida to New York City. I've read about the Great Migration in great detail from many authors, many academic authors, historians, and political scientists, but she, as a journalist, really captures the elements of why so many Blacks left the South. They were restricted under Jim Crow laws in the South to almost a caste existence and a lower caste existence, like the Untouchables in India. And their experiences, once they arrived in the cities that they migrated to, were a mirror of racial discrimination throughout the United States, both in the North and the South. The North didn't have Jim Crow laws, but there was what is called subtle discrimination throughout the North, as well as overt discrimination in the South. And Elizabeth Wilkerson really captures the whole point of the migration and the need to migrate. I thought it was a powerful read, and I recommend it for everyone to understand America today and yesterday.
Isabel Wilkerson, I'm advised that you should turn on your webcam.
Okay. Hello, I am overcome with joy. I am so thrilled to be in this company of people that I so admire, to be introduced, in fact, by Leon Dash, who is someone who I have looked up to my entire career. I remember Rosalie's story. I mean, am from Washington, D.C., so it means so much to me. This award, this recognition is beyond imagining for me. You know, I spent 15 years on this book. This is my copy of the book. This is my original copy of The Warmth of the Suns, which is actually 10 years old. It's been out for 10 years. It has had an incredible journey on its own, and it took me 15 years to write this book, to research it, to find the people who would be in this book, to find the protagonists, spend time with them, go deep into their lives, hear their stories, and to be able to also do the additional research in order to put this in context. I often say if this book were a human being and be in high school and dating, that's how long it took me to do this. So to be able to emerge from all of this to this kind of honor is just beyond imagining for me. I want to say that I spent that much time on this book because I believed from the depth of my soul that this was a story that was so much bigger. It's basically the story of the 20th century. It's the story of what it means to be an American. It is the bridge between the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement. It explains so much about what happened in our cities. You know, a lot of people view it as history until they turn on the news and they can see that this is living, breathing stories that do matter for us even now. I want to say that in terms of what the Great Migration is, I mean, I came to recognize how critical it was to understanding ourselves as a country. This was the only time in our country's history that people had to actually flee the land of their birth in order to be recognized as the citizens that they had always been. No other group of people have had to sort of act like immigrants in order to be recognized as citizens in their own country. I feel that this is in some ways a reminder that they were seeking political asylum within the borders of their own country, and then they were met with the conditions that we now see unfolding before our eyes even now. They were met with redlining, restricted covenants, and then also the police brutality that we see today. Many of the children and grandchildren of the people of the Great Migration ended up becoming incredible contributors to our society, but also fell victim to the police brutality. Tamir Rice, for example, was a great-grandchild of this Great Migration. So this is very much real and very much a part of our current day lives as Americans. I want to say also that the work on this book has been a reminder to me of the power of the work that we do. that it can have an impact, even though it may not seem that when we're in the midst of it. I came to realize how dependent we are and how fortunate we are for the generosity of the people whose stories we tell. I'm thinking at this moment of the three people that I ended up focusing in on: Ida Mae Brandon Gladney, George Swanson Starling, and Robert Joseph Pershing Foster. They did not live to see this book come out. They did not live to see it. I saw, in fact, George Starling said, if you don't finish this book soon, I'm going to be proofreading from heaven. And he was right. So I am so honored to be here among these incredible people. I'd like to close with one other reminder of the power of the work that we do. Sometimes we can't see the impact it will have on people. But this book, it's been out for 10 years. It happens to be astonishingly back on the bestseller list, which I am just profoundly grateful. But one of the things that I hear from people all the time, the people who read this book, is they will come up to me and tearfully say that this book was the last book that their mother, their father, their grandparent might have read before they passed away. And that sounds really sad and tragic until you actually hear from the people and they say it was a validating experience for people who suffered and endured so much to be able to see their stories told in this way, validating what they had endured, so that they could actually make that crossing, that it actually completed a sense of themselves, of what they had gone through. And that's the power of the work that we do. And that's what I've learned that, that sort of powers me through in the continuing work. Thank you so, so much for this honor.
Thank you. Congratulations, Isabel. Our final presenter, David Remnick, also appeared on that list of the top 100 works of journalism of the last century for his book, Lenin's Tomb. He was young, still I don't think anyone would accuse him of peaking early. David has gone on to a pretty good career as an editor as well as a writer. I think it is now safe to call him the long-time editor of The New Yorker, our most revered magazine. David was one of our judges, and David Remnick is participating tonight graciously to help us celebrate an article that appeared in another magazine as the top work of journalism produced in the last 10 years.
Good evening, I'm David Remnick from The New Yorker. Ta-Nehisi Coates has been called a visionary, a man speaking in a prophetic voice. But I know, because I have the privilege of knowing him, that he prefers to be called simply a writer. A reporter when reporting is at the center of his work. In 2014, Ta-Nehisi published a long article in The Atlantic called The Case for Reparations. The title made it sound as if he were pursuing a purely political point in the mode of an extended op-ed piece, but in fact, what Coates was doing was something far more elemental and close to the ground. By reporting the real histories, the real lives of Black Americans, particularly Black Americans whose forebears had made the Great Migration from towns like Clarksdale, Mississippi, to cities like Chicago in the North, he deepened our sense of what is meant by systemic racism, a racism bred into the bone of the way American life is lived and has been lived for so long. Systems that ensure that Black Americans live in far poorer conditions, with far fewer opportunities, systems that ensure that they earn far lower wages and accumulate far less wealth than white Americans. Systems that ensure that Black Americans, save for the very exceptional and the lucky, never quite get a leg up. Systemic racism. It's a system that we hear a lot about now, but somehow that phrase was not on the tongues of many people as recently as 2014, especially among white Americans. It took a series of thunderbolts to make that so. And one of those thunderbolts was the reporting, the thinking, and the writing of Ta-Nehisi Coates. Reparations was another concept that he brought to the fore. The one time I ever left the country as a young person, or even left the New York area for that matter, was when I went on a trip to Israel as a kid. The year was 1970. And when I landed at the airport, we drove to Jerusalem in a Mercedes taxi. A pretty broken down Mercedes, but it seemed incredible to me at the time. It turned out that that taxi was part of a reparations package to the state of Israel. This was, after all, barely 2 decades after 2/3 of European Jewry had been wiped out in the Holocaust. And that term, the Holocaust, was itself something quite new. And yet, a century after slavery, Black Americans had not only failed to receive any recompense for their labor, for their suffering, for the countless deaths suffered in the Middle Passage and on American soil, they had also endured Reconstruction, the Black Codes, lynching, Jim Crow, and as Coates makes plain in excruciating detail in his piece, all manner of discrimination and far worse, enshrined in American law and norms. Where was their justice? Where was justice for Black Americans? Germany had faced its guilt, had paid its reparations because, after all, it had been defeated on the battlefield. White America knew no such defeat, only a sense of assent. What writers like Ta-Nehisi Coates, as well as Toni Morrison and James Baldwin and so many others, what they demand is that we see America plain, that we see American history plain. They insist that if there is something like an American ideal, a collection of ideals, then we begin to make good on them, that we realize those ideals. And to do so, we have to reckon with what Ta-Nehisi Coates calls the case for reparations. It's as important, no less than Sula is important, or No Name on the Street. In the past 10 years, there's been no greater piece of journalism than that. And it's great because of its powers of empathy, description, and thought. His piece is great because what it demands of us is nothing less than being what America pretended to be in the first place. I'm deeply grateful to Ta-Nehisi Coates and congratulate him for his achievement. And I know that this essay is just one part of a body of work that keeps growing, deepening, and expanding. Congratulations, Ta-Nehisi.
I'm told to tell Ta-Nehisi to turn on his webcam.
I'm sorry, it's not letting me cut on the video. It's saying unable to start video.
We knew we were going to have some problems. So make sure that he's allowed to turn on his video co-hosts.
Oh, I think we got to go. Okay, here we go. Here we go. All right, we're good here. Well, obviously this is a tremendous honor. I feel like, being a professor at NYU, that maybe I got a little bit of home field advantage. Because when I look at, my colleagues who not just were in the top 10, but who were on this list, when I think about, say, Catherine Schultz is the really, really big one. And, how I read that piece, and I teach that piece at NYU, and there's certain writers who you read them and you think, I can't do that. Or even folks who are here in the top 10. I had the great honor of giving David Farinhold and Julie K. Brown the Hillman Award for their journalism, their tremendous work. Megan and Jody, who took this reportage of sexual harassment and sexual assault and rape beyond the level of he say she say, and just nailed it down. One of my great mentors was David Carr, and back in, I don't know, this must have been 2002, he was on Harvey Weinstein's case and could not get to the story, and was actually one of the people that Harvey recruited to spy on. Kate Boo, who when I began my journalism career in 1996, had left a little alternative newspaper called the Washington City Paper, where I was then working, and had gone to the Washington Post. And just had, begun her ascent that, shortly thereafter would take her to the MacArthur, and then, to further heights at the New Yorker, and now here on this list. And, I remember her coming in the office, and all of us as, young cub reporters, knew that that's who we should be, trying to be, and that should be, the standard. And so when I think about being in this type of company, it just feels a little absurd to speak of, a number one. And chiefly, I have to say that there really are, two people who are in this top 10 who, when I think about the case for reparations, not just as a work that stands on the back of, a community and the back of a struggle, and folks who had, made the case for reparations in so many ways, and all the scholars who had done the research that, allowed me to make the case, but, writers and journalists, on this list who were doing that work too. You have to remember, when I began the reporting, which took about a year and a half, it would have been like late 2012, early 2013. And while I had grown up with the concept of reparations, the idea of publishing it in a place like the Atlantic and proposing that it be taken seriously by some of the upper echelons in the country was not, well, I thought it should be taken seriously, but it wasn't clear to me that it could actually be done. I had great support from my editors, from James Bennett, from Scott Stossel at the Atlantic. But what I had more than that was I had a book. And I remember I had, made this list of books that I needed to read, if I was going to make this case. And everybody I knew who I loved and respected could not stop talking about Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns. And it did not occur to me that I needed to read Isabel's book in order to get to the case for reparations. But something in me said this might be related. And as it turns out, it really was. And I can directly tell you how. It was Isabel who, more than anyone, made the case that the contract that Black Americans have with their country, has been utterly and completely failed. One way that reporting, when I was younger, that was done to depict, those sorts of failures was to focus on the poor, the urban poor in the Black community. And that wasn't wrong. Speaking to somebody that, was born and raised in inner city Baltimore, that wasn't wrong, but it left the impression that somehow Black people who had, quote unquote, as is told to us, played by the rules, were somehow okay. And what Isabel did was she just pulled the sheet right off of that. She pointed to, folks who had, basically taken on what America, says to itself are middle-class values and had been utterly failed, and far from, their success, their, bourgeois, attempts towards uplift, far from, making them the envy, of this country or a principle, a symbol of the country, it made them targets for plunder. And it made them targets for pillage. And when I saw that, I said, I can do this. I can actually write this. And so, I've referred, in the past, to The Warmth of Other Suns as the godmother to the case for reparations. And I'll repeat that tonight. It simply would not be possible, for me to have written the case for reparations if it wasn't for Isabel and all the work that she had done before that. And this is not made up for this speech. Isabel has heard this before. I said it at the time, and I'm just saying it again. The second person who's absolutely, key in getting the case for reparations is Nicole Hannah-Jones. At the time, Nicole was not Ida Bay Wells. I don't even think she had red hair. She, had not become, what she's become, today. She did not have a Polk. She did not have a Peabody. She didn't have a National Magazine Award in the list of, awards that she has. I, joke with her. She's got to be one of our most decorated journalists at this time. She was a reporter at ProPublica. And what was there, if not the awards, if not the, the Ida Bay Wells handle, was the work and the reporting. And even before me, she had gone in and had begun, doing this reporting on housing segregation. And I might have, the time periods wrong. I don't know if she had done the George Romney, work, but that was the kind of diligence that, she displayed. She would go to the archives of, somebody like, George Romney to dig up how housing segregation had actually been effectuated. She's just a ferocious researcher and reporter. And I was reading her series about the time I was beginning to do this reporting. And, it was just crucial to understanding that this thing, which seemed so far off and really just existed in my journalistic imagination, was actually a possible thing that I could do. Now, I highlight that for a reason. I feel myself to be a part of a community, and I don't want to embarrass Nicole too much, but I'll just say that there are not too many journalists that I can think of. In fact, there's not a single one that I can think of that has produced the work of journalism that made them the target of an executive order by the President of the United States. And I just feel that, it would be disgraceful, if, I did not, acknowledge not just how important it is, for work like that to exist, but for young people, younger reporters, who are where I was when I was looking up, to Cape Blue, to feel like they can imagine things and they can use, journalism to really, pull back the sheet, and unveil the truth. And so, I just, really, want to say that, while I am, myself truly personally honored by this award, what I do is not possible without my larger community. And I want to make sure that I'm supporting that larger community. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Ta-Nehisi. No home field advantage. The outside judges were even more enthusiastic about your work. Congratulations to you and to all the others who produced this extraordinary journalism. It has been such a pleasure to hear from you and hear about it this evening. You can find links to this work and also to the 122 works that were nominated from which this work was selected on the NYU Journalism website, or just search for Top 10 Works of Journalism. And I ought to warn all you spectacular journalists that we will probably do this again in the year 2030. So you better get busy reporting and writing. Thanks to the presenters, to everyone at the Carter Institute who helped us out. Thanks to Mike, and of course to the amazing Adrian for the long, long hours he put into this show. I want to express my gratitude in particular to two very talented students and journalists, Melvis Acosta and Alex Brady, who worked with me tirelessly for the last 9 months on this project. And thanks to all of you for joining us. I'm Mitchell Stevens. Good night.